In January 2025, James Tyler announced the pending release of a Made in China line. The news was met with mixed responses. Overall, extremely positive, even exuberant, but with a proportion of commentators expressing real concern. Tyler had already launched the Tyler Japan range in 2016, having quietly launched the Japanese-made Joe X guitars in 2006. Aside from the blanket stigma attached to made in China guitars, the prevailing question was, can these guitars live up to the James Tyler name? Around this time, I'd been in talks with GuitarGuitar about putting on a James Tyler masterclass here in Birmingham. However, the JTG announcement provoked a change in direction and we began planning something special for the launch. Originally, the guitars were due to land in the UK at the beginning of May. However, out of the blue, I got a call from Steve at GuitarGuitar informing me that the guitars were arriving imminently and that in fact GuitarGuitar were getting the first JTG guitars in the UK. So in less than a week I packed up my equipment and headed to GuitarGuitar for the shoot. As you can imagine, I was very excited but also somewhat apprehensive. I have such a love for the James Tyler brand, but what if these guitars fell short of the mark? But I set up my lights, cameras, recording equipment, and as I sat down, Steve passed me a black sparkle MK1 and it felt like a Tyler, immediately familiar. The neck felt like my US made black classic, comfortable in my hand and with the signature Tyler rolled fretboard edges. The guitar was extremely well set up. Right out of the case, there was no buzzing, no dead spots. The action was medium low. It was intonated perfectly. The trem felt like the Goto 510 on my Black Classic or the Tyler branded equivalent, which is on Woody. Resonant, sensitive, responsive. So I breathed a sigh of relief. I plugged in the MK1 and I flicked the standby switch on my Mesa Boogie. Now, the real test can begin.
What I've been surprised about is I knew we'd build a great guitar, and to do that, I knew it was going to be, one of the higher priced Chinese guitars. But my thinking, and I think Ian, the new owner's thinking was, let's basically build like a custom shop China-made guitar. I've traveled all over Asia looking at factories and stuff when I worked for Line 6 and we did the James Tyler Variacs. So this time around, Ian, the owner, he's Chinese, so he went around. He was going to have me come with him, and I'm like, yeah, I've been there enough, and so just we can get on a Zoom call or whatever, we can talk, but you go check it out. Well, he went traveling and he was checking out different factories, and he went to a factory called Yako Factory. And I'm going to take off my glasses, I think. It's actually better a little blurred out. I don't have to look at my face so much. So he went around, to different factories, and he landed at a factory called Yako Factory, and he, as he was talking to them and checking out the factory, he found out that three of the guys there knew me because it was a factory that Fernandez was investor in with a company called Reliance back in the 90s. So when I was at Fernandez, I used to get massive amounts of guitars from these guys. So they're like, "Oh, we know Rich," So that kind of convinced Ian, and he really kind of got along with them and everything. And one thing that I've heard back from Ian, and I'm actually going to go there and film and talk with them and go over setups even more. So I mean, they're already great, but just go visit the guys and show people where these are made and stuff, so people could see that it's a very similar thing that what we do here. It's not just a line. They're actual luthiers. But one thing I heard back is that these guys are, I wouldn't say in tears, but pretty like excited to actually be building guitars and doing luthier work.
Oh
Because
man, that's awesome.
that's the thing, right? it's like you said, the misconception. It's like, but they grew up, they play guitar, they want to make great guitars, but they're asked to build, really super affordable, like for beginner guitar. And that's kind of all they're asked to do. And so they're having a blast. So that's kind of the background on how we pick them. And Jim saw the last he did see one of the first run, before he was gone. But but yeah, I miss Jim.
Being fortunate enough to own two US made Tylers, my Back to Basics Black Classic Level 1 and the Hyperspect Studio Mean Machine that is Woody, I felt in a good position to be able to assess the specs of the MK1. The neck profile of the JTG MK1 seems based on Tyler's standard 59 neck profile. The JTG 5000 single coil pickups that are in all of the MK1s seem to me reminiscent of the 5500s. There is a degree of natural compression to them, but they have a lot of vibe and a lot of attitude. And with the addition of the mid boost engaged but turned down, they're only a stone's throw from that pristine 80s clean tone. The bridge humbucker appeared slightly higher output than the Tyler Secret humbuckers that are in both of my guitars. This was ludicrously fun to combine with the onboard mid boost. You can hear that tone in the solo section of the track at the beginning of this video. If I remember correctly, the mid boost was rolled up to about 60%, and you can hear both the neck single coil and the bridge humbucker in that section of the song. The hardware felt very solid, and after stretching the strings in for a minute, stayed in tune incredibly well. All 7 MK1s that I played were very consistent with only minor variations in setup. There were 2 of them that had slightly lower action than the others, but other than that, I noticed no perceivable differences. Let's talk finishes. One other thing that I noticed with the new line that I really liked is that they feel kind of like their own entity, and I think part of the way you've done that is with the finishes. It doesn't feel like you've done a kind of Tyler light. They kind of feel like their own thing. I know there's obviously some crossover in terms of you've done like a Jim Burst, but a bunch of the other ones are unique. I haven't seen those on even like US Tylers, and it's kind of it's really cool. They've got their own personality.
That was the idea too. Yeah, absolutely. That was the idea, and obviously we could never do schmears just because of price point, and we wouldn't want to, and for sure we wouldn't want to degrade the US by doing a wrap or something, because you could do that, right? But the Ian, the owner, and the factory, and we were like, gosh, what could we do? And they came up with it. It's just, you can tell it's just a spongy finish on that blue Milky Way and the molten iron. And that could lead to other colors like purple and white and, and stuff. And we were thinking that, that would be for the guy who really wants a weird finish on his Tyler, but it wouldn't do as well as Chameleon or something. But yeah, no, everybody wants those, and we sold out of them immediately because we didn't make as many. So that was nice, so it was like we're going to be making more of those in the future. But
cool, man.
It's a way to get a flavor, like you said, without, so it's like, I mean, how many guys, there might be 1 or 2 customers that are like, I was going to get that Vice Vomit, but I really like that blue Milky Way, so I'm going to get that with a loaded Pickguard. And I love the JTG, marketing it as JTG, and keeping that separate from James Tyler. But I also like seeing that big JTG on the headstock, because you see that from a mile away too. And ultimately that's James Tyler. You know what I mean? It's like with him gone and everything. I think he'd be really pleased with, where it's all landing and the excitement. I'm sure he would.
Anyone following the release may recall that no sooner had the JTG line been announced, the questions began flooding in requesting custom options. Will there be a version with a Floyd Rose? Will there be a version with series parallel switching? And although I get it completely, to me this was perhaps somewhat missing the point of Tyler releasing a more affordable line. There has to be compromises made somewhere to get the guitar below a certain price point. And personally, I would rather have a fixed spec than the company have to compromise on other aspects of the construction. However, Rich had already anticipated this inevitable flood of questions and has a solution in mind.
So with the JTG, I always just think about that end customer. Who is it? It's the guy who wants it. Tyler can't afford it. Guy who doesn't want to take him on the road. A guy who just wants one to, I'm going to get one of those and just start trying pickups. And we're going to offer, loaded pickguards, so you can pay us
Cool.
just for the pickguard part, and it drops in. It takes about 20 minutes to switch with a soldering iron. So that'll be part of it. And yeah, it's gonna be fun.
How did you decide, considering that you offer so many different options at the US and the Japanese shops, how did you decide what the baseline spec was going to be for this first run that you've done?
Well, what we're not going to do ever is the classic or the Tyler Baster.
Mm.
Those were 90s creations, because everything was going grunge, and and Landau was going grunge, and everything was beat up Strats and stuff like that. But with these, it was like just a no-brainer to keep it to our specs. I mean, Jim always said, hey, even the Studio Elite is just a really nice fancy Strat, and he knows his legacy and he knows where he came from, and like this whole industry is very small. You realize when you get into it how small it is, and we're all friends. We all just have done this thing, but so it was for sure it needed to be our stuff. So Studio Elite HD, I mean, that's been the most popular for years. And from that one, people can, like I said, get loaded pickguards, and they can put buttons and switches, and or as I've been saying, because of Vince Gill, all those LA switches.
Aside from the 7 MK1 models I played, I also tested 2 M1 models. These are based on Tyler's Mongoose model and a very different animal to the Studio Elite stylings of the MK1. Here were my first impressions of the M1s.
So was there M1s there too? Did you play the
Did.
the
Yeah, man.
mongoosey
I
looking
did.
thing?
Yeah, I thought it was great, man. I mean, they're on the track, and then as I mentioned, we did like individual demos of all of them, just like a quick clean to mean kind of thing. And I'd
Yeah.
never played like a real mongoose. I don't think I've ever come across one in the UK, but it sounded great. It
Yeah.
sounded great, and a discernibly different vibe. It wasn't just like oh, it's a Studio Elite, but in a different body shape. It has a whole different personality to it.
Yeah.
Definitely leans a little bit more vintage, but what was really
Yeah.
nice was that with the track, I was double tracking through most of it and had the kind of Elite style on one side and then the Mongoose style on the other, and they complement each other so well. Yeah, it was awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, dude, they're great. I was optimistic, but I think that the whole range kind of exceeded my expectations. Really, it just felt like a Tyler, It
Yeah.
wasn't. There was no stretch. There was no battle. It was just there straight away, and it felt like a Tyler, and the neck felt like a Tyler, and then the second I plugged it in and then ran it through my Boogie and stuff, it's like it's just there. There was no fighting it, and
Yeah.
it was awesome. You guys have done such a good job with it, and
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see them get into the hands of more people. I know that the initial reaction was kind of mixed. It was like a combination of massive excitement and people almost being what you mentioned earlier about, oh, uh, this is out of alignment with the Tyler brand doing something that's Chinese made and stuff. And I think that as soon as people play these things, any of those kind of concerns are going to be put to bed within
Yeah.
moments.
I mean, I went into depth in an email with that guy that was disappointed, and his next email back to me was, "Wow, your email speaks volumes as to, who." He said, "I'm back. I'm not disappointed anymore." And he was like, "Now I get it."
Yeah.
I said, "Look, there's luthiers that love building guitars there. We worked with them. We're going to make an affordable Tyler for people who love the Tyler brand that couldn't get there." And I'm excited about the M1. We're calling it, it looks like a mongoose, but we're just for confusion stuff, we're calling it an M1. The
Yeah.
other one is going to be called the MK1. Um, it's a set neck. That's what's really fun, is because we have a set neck ready. We're working on trying to get it out to the market. This year we're going to do basses, but um, we're working on that. I'm getting a new CNC to start getting that done. And but to have that set neck, and it's 25 and a half. So if down tuned guys can tune down and you still have that tightness, kind of like you get from a PRS, because of the extended scale length.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun. I'm excited about that one being it. I think it will do well because we don't even do that yet. You know what I mean? And our set neck is going to be 24 and 3/4. So this will always be that like 25 and a half. And people, if people are wondering, because I'm sure this is going to be like a question on for everyone is, are you going to do Floyd? Are you going to do that? HSH? For now, no.
There seemed to be an initial misconception that the JTG line had only been initiated after Jim's passing, and this categorically wasn't the case. Jim had inspected the first early incarnations of the line and had been at the heart of the feedback and refinement process alongside Rich Rankin. Rich was heartfelt in his assurance that Jim would have been both proud and excited at this final incarnation of the JTG line.
We're not keeping a secret, that Ian from Wild West Guitars, bought the company. Back in 2020, I came back to work for Jim, and through 2021, we started talking about somehow me, taking over, and buying it from him somehow. And I learned about something called an earn out, and I was just dipping my foot in and seeing what the company was worth and how much it would take me to, if I did something like that, to recoup for Jim or whatever. And Ian from Wild West Guitars had shown interest. So I said, "Jim, you gotta reach out. You gotta, check every avenue." And Ian came back with a great offer. And I'm like, "Jim, you got to do it." And he's like, "Yeah, but what about you?" And I said, "I'll hang out as long as it's fun. I'm not too worried. I could go do other things." And he goes, "Well, Ian said that nothing's going to change." And I go, "Jim, that's what they all say." I said, "Stuff changes." And, at other companies I was at, "Oh, nothing's going to change," and stuff did change. But in this case, it changed for the better because Ian's been super amazing to work for. And this isn't me propagandizing. He's just a good human as well, and his instincts are great. 2022, the ownership changed. So through 2022, Jim, and at that point in 2021, he had been properly diagnosed with interstitial lung disease. And so he was working on that with UCLA and getting his ducks in a row. And so he got a lung transplant in April of 2022, and he was working for me because the ownership had changed. And we kind of would chuckle about that. Like he would mosey in and he'd be like, well, what do you need me to do today? you know, and I had him doing repairs because he liked doing them. And, we just wanted him in the building doing something because we could go up to him and ask him questions about history or this or that, or why did you do this or whatever. And he taught a lot of people here a lot of stuff. So that was going great. And then 2023 is probably end of 2022, beginning of 2023, Ian started floating the idea of doing a China built affordable Tyler. And me and Jim were thinking the same thing as a lot of people were thinking, it'd be like, oh, what is this going to be? It's not time. I felt like we should build the company up to, 15 million a year or so, and the stuff we could do here and then launch, kind of like, everybody does. But a lot of stuff has changed in the world since, even that sort of model. So we were like, okay. But Jim, like I said earlier, the first prototypes came in and they were not good and a lot of issues. And Jim and I went through them, and I did a whole report on them. And then the alpha units came in and they were much better. And Jim saw those and we made comments and all this kind of stuff. And working with him on the JTV and working for Jim in the 80s, I've internalized a lot of who Jim is, in my own sort of thinking. Obviously I'm my own guy, but so Jim and I looked at those, and I did another report, and he did see the first run, I believe. No, he did not. No, he was gone. So he definitely worked on the betas, and that's why I think if he saw these, he'd be really proud of where they landed.
Yeah.
But the rolled edges and the fretwork, he was like, wow, this is great. And I know that he would like where this is all landing and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because it's become something that I didn't even see coming. And that's where Ian comes in. And I told Ian this the other day. I said, I was just really proud to work for him and really proud of his care for the brand.
So, who are these guitars for? They're for the folks who can't justify spending $6,000 to $8,000 on a guitar, but for whom Tyler has always held a special place in their heart. They're for those who love Jim's legacy and for those players who are interwoven into the lineage of Tyler, Michael Landau, Dan Huff, even Steve Lukather. They're for the students who are saving for their first grown-up guitar and looking for a workhorse that can carry them through the first years of their career and hold its own in any musical situation. And they're for the pros who want to leave their US-made Tylers at home in the studio and take something on the road that feels and sounds like home. The thing that I'm really excited about is the idea of a younger generation having an access point into this brand. I would have been so stoked to have had access to the JTG line when I was 18 years old. And so I'm excited for the kids who are coming up now who that might be a possibility for. I think Rich Renkin and Ian, the new owner of James Tyler Guitars, have done a fabulous job with this line, as have the luthiers in China, who, in Rich's own words, were honoured to contribute to the legacy of such an iconic guitar builder as James Tyler.